My daughter chose her husband's word over mine and told me to leave. The next morning, a certified medical letter arrived at my house. It declared me cognitively unfit and attached a care plan I had never requested. I read the doctor's name twice. I had never met that doctor in my life. I appreciate you sitting down with me for this one. Before we begin, leave me a quick comment. Have you ever had someone in your family underestimate you or doubt what you were truly capable of? Yes or no? I would love to hear it. A quick note, some details in this story are fictionalized for emotional depth and reflection. The lesson underneath is what matters most. The judge read the petition aloud, and every word landed like a nail driven into a coffin I was still breathing inside. That I, Eugene Mercer, age 72, was no longer mentally competent to manage my own personal or financial affairs. That I posed a risk to myself. That I required the immediate appointment of a legal guardian to oversee decisions I had been making on my own for more than half a century. I stood in the fluorescent glare of a San Diego County courtroom in a plain flannel shirt and worn khaki trousers. My calloused hands folded in front of me like a man who had already decided the outcome. The industrial polish on the floor smelled the way institutions always smell, like control dressed up as cleanliness. My mouth tasted like the bitter residue of courthouse coffee I had drunk 3 hours ago and could not get rid of. 10 feet to my left, my son-in-law sat at the petitioner's table. Brent Caldwell was 38 years old, a financial planning consultant who had married my daughter Lorraine 6 years ago, and spent every one of those years learning the layout of my life the way a locksmith learns a building he plans to rob. He wore a navy suit that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and adjusted his cufflinks with the practiced ease of a man who believed every room he entered belonged to him. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something I could not hear, but I saw his lips move, and I read 2 words clearly. Just formality. Have you ever stood in a room full of strangers while someone you trusted tried to convince them you had lost your mind? There is no pain quite like it. It is not anger. Anger is hot and fast and burns itself out. This is colder. This is watching a man you welcomed into your family sit across a courtroom and nod along while a clerk reads a document that says your brain no longer works, and knowing that he wrote every word of it. The clerk finished reading. The judge looked at me over the top of his glasses. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents above us. I stood up slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not gesture. I did not look at my attorney. I looked directly at Brent. The way you look at someone when you want them to remember your face for the rest of their life. And I said 4 words. Quiet. Measured. Final. Brent's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hands went flat against the table like the wood was the only thing keeping him from falling through the floor. His attorney grabbed his arm. The judge leaned forward. And for 3 full seconds, nobody in that courtroom breathed. I will not tell you what those 4 words were. Not yet. Because if I told you now, they would sound like a sentence from a stranger. To understand what they meant, to feel the weight of them the way that courtroom felt them, you need to know what happened first. What would you do if your own family used a piece of paper to try to erase everything you are? Not your money, not your house. You, the mind that built a life from nothing. The hands that held your wife when she was dying. The memory that can still recite every patient's name from the first clinic you opened in 1987. What would you do if someone you loved looked at all of that and said it was gone, and expected you to sit quietly while they took what was left? I will tell you exactly what those 4 words were. I will tell you why they turned a courtroom silent and ended a man's life as he knew it. But first, you need to see the dinner table where it all began. I built that table with my wife Colleen 40 years ago, back when we were still eating off plywood and dreaming about a clinic we could not yet afford. It was oak, solid, the kind of thing that lasts longer than the people who made it. 2 weeks before I stood in that courtroom, my son-in-law sat at that table, looked me in the eye over a plate of roast chicken, and told me I was no longer competent to manage my own life. It started at that dinner table, and by the time it ended, it had become something none of us saw coming, least of all the man in the navy suit. He thought a forged signature and a filing fee were enough to take down a man who had spent 50 years building every lock in the building he was trying to break into. 2 weeks before that courtroom, a Sunday evening in September, the oak table still had Colleen's initials carved into the underside of the left corner. She scratched them there the night we finished sanding it, laughing like a teenager. And now my son-in-law was using it as a stage for my execution. I set the table for 4 in the warm amber light of my North Park bungalow. Roast chicken cooling on the counter, coffee already brewing because I knew Brent would want some after dessert. He always did. And I had spent 6 years learning the habits of the man who married my daughter, the same way I learned everything else, by paying attention. My daughter Lorraine Caldwell, 40 years old, with her mother's dark eyes, carried the salad bowl in from the kitchen with a smile that did not quite reach her cheekbones. She was an interior design consultant who had inherited Colleen's taste for clean lines and my habit of avoiding conflict until it was unavoidable. She set the bowl down and squeezed my shoulder, and I almost believed this was just a family dinner. Hadley Caldwell, my 15-year-old granddaughter, sat at the far end of the table with her phone face down beside her plate, watching everything with those sharp, quiet eyes she got from her mother. She did not say much that evening. She rarely did around Brent. But she listened the way I listen, with her whole body. Brent filled the first 20 minutes with rehearsed warmth. He asked about my prescriptions, whether I had missed a refill, whether I was still driving at night. Every question casual, every question aimed. So, Dad, have you been keeping up with your refills? Lorraine mentioned. You missed one last month. I switched pharmacies, I said. The new one is closer to the house. Right. He smiled that thin, practiced smile. It is just these little things add up, you know. I knew. I also knew that little things do not add up by accident when someone is counting them on purpose. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a dinner table when someone reaches for a weapon disguised as a folder. Brent leaned down, unclipped his leather briefcase, and placed a thick, bound dossier on the oak surface between the chicken and the salad. The thud was soft, but it landed in my chest like a fist. A consultant came by a few months ago, he said, sliding the dossier toward me. Kirk Bentley. You remember him, right? Senior wellness advisor? He recommended we formalize a care structure for you. It is all standard. I remembered Kirk Bentley. 45 years old, soft gray cardigan, a voice like warm butter, and a business card that smelled like department store cologne. He had visited 3 months earlier. Asked questions about my daily routine, my medication, my finances. I had answered politely, because I was raised to be courteous to guests. He had left a glossy brochure on the counter, and I had dropped it in the recycling that same evening. Now his name was on the cover of a dossier that my son-in-law was pushing across my dead wife's table. Lorraine leaned forward. Dad, we just want to make sure you are taken care of. That is all this is. Standard for whom? I said, and I opened the cover. The first pages were boilerplate medical power of attorney, financial oversight authorization, a proposed care schedule that read like a prison intake form. I turned each page slowly, running my fingers along the crisp edges. feeling the weight of what they were asking me to hand over. My daily life, my decisions, my autonomy. You know the feeling when you are reading something and your body understands the danger before your mind catches up? Your fingers go cold, your jaw tightens. The words on the page start to blur because your eyes are moving faster than your comprehension, searching for the thing you already know is there. I found it on the last page. A medical certification. A formal declaration that I, Eugene Mercer, exhibited significant cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia. It recommended immediate appointment of a guardian to oversee all personal and financial decisions. It was signed by a doctor I had never met, a name I had never seen in 50 years of working in elder care in this city. I knew every licensed geriatric specialist in San Diego County. I had hired half of them, trained a dozen more. This name did not belong to any of them. I read it twice. Then I set the dossier down on the table, right next to the salad bowl, and I looked at my son-in-law. He was still holding out his pen, still smiling, still certain that the old man in the flannel shirt would do what old men are expected to do, comply without question. "What doctor signed this?" I said. The pen stopped moving. The smile did not disappear. It froze, the way a screen freezes right before a crash. And in that half-second pause, I saw everything I needed to see. Brent pulled the dossier back across the table, like I had contaminated it with my question. And the mask he had worn all evening finally cracked down the center. "You are not competent to make these decisions anymore," he said. And this time he was standing. His chair pushed back so hard it scraped the tile. "That is the reality. Everyone in this room can see it except you." His voice filled the kitchen, the way voices fill rooms when the person speaking has stopped caring about volume and started caring about winning. He listed his evidence like a prosecutor who had rehearsed in front of a mirror. I had repeated a story about Colleen at Easter. I had forgotten a neighbor's name at the mailbox. I had left the stove on once, in January, a burner I turned off 30 seconds after I noticed it. "I have watched you deteriorate for a year, and I am done pretending it is not happening," he said. "Sit down." "Brent," I told him. He did not sit down. He stood over that oak table with his palms flat on the wood and his jaw set. And he looked at me the way people look at furniture they have already decided to replace. I turned to Lorraine, my daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders at the county fair, the woman who had held my hand at Colleen's funeral and whispered that she would never let anything happen to me. She would not meet my eyes. There is no sound in the world quite like your only child choosing someone else's version of you over the man standing right in front of her. "Dad," she said, and her voice was so quiet I had to lean forward to hear it. "Maybe you should go home." She caught herself. Maybe you should stay somewhere else tonight, just until things settle." She said go home, and then corrected herself. Because this was my home. She was sitting in it, and she knew exactly what she was asking. I looked at Hadley. My granddaughter had not moved since Brent started shouting. Her phone was still face down on the table, her hands were in her lap, but her eyes were locked on her father with an expression I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror an hour ago. The look of someone cataloging every word for later. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I buttoned my coat, took my keys from the hook by the front door, and walked into the September night without saying a single word. The porch light shrank in my rearview mirror until it was a pinpoint, and then it was gone. The truck smelled like leather and motor oil and 40 years of the same seat. I drove south on 30th Street with no destination, past the taco shop Colleen and I used to walk to on Friday nights, past the pharmacy I had switched to last month. past the elementary school where Lorraine learned to read. San Diego at night is beautiful. If you are not driving through it, wondering whether your own family just staged an ambush with a forged medical document, or if you are actually losing the mind you have trusted for 7 decades. Have you ever been alone in a car at night and wondered just for a moment if the people who doubted you might be right? The doubt came in like a tide. I tried to remember the name of the new pharmacy. My mind went blank. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds of white silence where the name should have been. Rite Aid, the one on University Avenue. 3 seconds. That was all it took for the doubt to get its teeth in. 3 seconds of hesitation, and suddenly every accusation Brent had hurled across that dinner table felt plausible. Maybe I had repeated that story about Colleen. Maybe I did leave the stove on. Maybe 72 years was enough, and the rest was just pride refusing to admit the warranty had expired. Then I thought about the signature on the last page of that dossier. A doctor I had never met. A name that did not belong to any licensed geriatric specialist in this county. I had spent 50 years in elder care. I had built the facilities, hired the doctors, trained the staff. If that name were real, I would have known it the way I know my own. The doubt burned away like fog under a heat lamp. I pulled back into my own driveway and sat in the dark cab with the engine ticking. They wanted me to believe I was losing my mind. But that name on the certificate was a ghost. And ghosts do not sign legal documents unless someone living is holding the pen. By morning, I would know exactly whose hand that was. I did not go inside right away. I sat in the truck until the engine stopped ticking. And then I sat a little longer, listening to the jasmine rustle against the kitchen window in the September wind. The house smelled exactly the way it had the night Colleen died. Cold coffee left too long on the counter, and that faint sweetness she planted 11 years ago that refused to stop blooming. I went to the home office. To anyone glancing in, the room looked like it belonged to a man who had given up. Scuffed oak desk, cracked leather chair with a split down the left armrest, dusty agricultural manuals on the shelves that I had not opened since the 90s, a single desk lamp that cast a circle of gold on a surface covered in scratch marks and water rings. That was the point. I sat down and ran my hand across the desk. My fingers found the groove where Colleen used to rest her reading glasses every night before bed. 11 years and I still had not sanded it smooth. Some marks are not meant to be repaired. They are meant to remind you why you keep going. Colleen Mercer, my wife of 41 years, died on a Tuesday morning in October, with her hand still warm in mine, and her last words about the patients who needed us. She was 68. She had spent half her life beside me in the elder care industry, and the other half making sure I did not lose myself inside it. Grief is a strange tenant. It does not pay rent, but it rearranges every piece of furniture in your life until you learn to walk around it in the dark. I closed my eyes, and I was back in 1987. An abandoned clinic in El Cajon with a leaking roof and floors so filthy Colleen and I spent 3 weekends on our hands and knees with bleach and steel wool. We hired 2 nurses. We borrowed against our house. We made a promise to each other the night before we opened the doors. If we ever get too big to remember what this smells like, we sell everything and walk away, she had said. Kneeling on the clinic floor with a bucket of bleach beside her and her hair tied back with a rubber band, I told her we would never forget. I kept that promise. She kept it until the morning she stopped breathing. Together, we turned that one clinic into something neither of us had imagined, a chain of 12 facilities across Southern California, built on a single principle. No elderly person under our care would ever be exploited for profit. 38 years later, my own son-in-law was trying to use the industry we built to erase me from existence. and he was doing it with a forged signature from a doctor who did not exist. Let me tell you something about hiding wealth. The hardest part is not keeping the secret from strangers. It is watching your own family pity you for a poverty that does not exist. It is sitting at a dinner table while your son-in-law mocks your flannel shirt and your old truck. The shirt is a choice. The truck is a preference. The bungalow is a deliberate decision, made by a man who promised his dying wife he would never confuse net worth with character. I reached beneath the desk and felt for the latch behind the false panel. The steel drawer clicked open with a sound like a rifle bolt sliding home. Inside sat a single leather folder. And inside that folder sat the document that would have changed everything. Brent thought he knew about me. A master trust agreement. A blind trust controlling 12 elder care facilities and assets worth roughly $90 million across Southern California. The sole controlling beneficiary was me. The trust is the only other person on Earth who knew the full scope of what Colleen and I had built was a man named Vernon Ashford, an elder law attorney I had trusted for nearly 2 decades. The paper was cool under my fingers. I rested my calloused hand on it and felt the weight of everything it represented. Every facility, every patient, every promise. I closed the drawer and locked it. The trust was not a shield to wave around. It was a loaded weapon, and loaded weapons are only useful when you deploy them at the exact right moment. But tomorrow morning I would not reach for this drawer. I would reach for my phone. Vernon Ashford had been waiting 18 years for a call like the one I was about to make. And the man in the navy suit who thought he was robbing a helpless old man had no idea that the old man had already started building the case that would end him. I never made it to dawn. I was already awake at 5:30, sitting at the kitchen table with black coffee and the forged doctor's name turning circles in my head, when I heard something brush against the front door. The certified letter was leaning against the screen, propped between the frame and the glass, like someone had placed it there in the dark while I was still inside, deciding my next move. White envelope, official postmark, my name typed in block letters across the front with the kind of precision that says lawyer, not family. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it with a butter knife. Morning dew was still drying on the concrete outside. The coffee was bitter and grounding, and I drank half the cup before I looked at the first page. A formal medical declaration of cognitive impairment. A detailed care plan with my daily schedule mapped out in 15-minute blocks. And behind both of those, a durable power of attorney. 6 pages of dense legal language giving Brent full authority over my finances, my medical decisions, and my property. I turned to the signature page and felt something in my chest go very still. My name was on the line. My signature, the looping M, the sharp K at the end of Mercer, the slight upward slant I have had since I learned cursive in the 4th grade. It was perfect. And I had never held the pen that wrote it. Imagine opening an envelope and finding your own handwriting, except your hand never touched the paper. Imagine seeing your identity used as a key to a lock you did not know existed. That is what forgery feels like when it is done by someone who has studied you closely enough to copy the way you cross your T's. The signing physician was printed in clean block letters beneath a license number, Dr. Raymond Holt, M.D., board-certified geriatric psychiatry. The same ghost name from the dossier at dinner. I had built 12 elder care facilities across Southern California. I knew every geriatric psychiatrist licensed in this county by name and reputation. There was no Raymond Holt. There had never been a Raymond Holt. My first instinct was to call Lorraine. I picked up the phone and stared at her name in my contacts. My thumb hovered over it for 3 full seconds. Then I remembered the way she had looked at the floor instead of looking at me. The way she had said, "Go home," and then corrected herself because she knew she was asking me to leave a house I had owned for 40 years. I scrolled past her name. Who do you call when your family is the threat, the people who love you, or the people who are paid to protect you? I dialed a number I had memorized but never saved under a name. Vernon Ashford answered on the second ring, his voice dry and precise at 6 in the morning. The kind of 61-year-old elder law attorney who billed $400 an hour and earned every cent of it. He had been managing my trust for nearly 2 decades. He was the only person alive who knew the full scope of what Colleen and I had built. I need you to listen, I said. I am going to read you a document that arrived at my door this morning. I read the medical declaration first, then the care plan, then the power of attorney, including the forged signature and the notarization date. I read it the way I would have read a patient intake report at one of my facility's clinical. Precise, no emotion. Vernon did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. When I finished reading the doctor's name and license number, the line went silent for 10 full seconds. I could hear him breathing. I could hear a pen uncapping. "Read me the license number again," he said. Slowly, I read it again. Another silence. 5 seconds this time. Then Vernon spoke in the voice I had only heard him use once before the day he told me Colleen's estate was finalized and I was officially alone. "Do not sign anything," he said. "Do not call your daughter. Do not confront your son-in-law. I will call you back within the hour." He called back in 43 minutes. He did not start with pleasantries. "The medical license number on that document belongs to a physician who had his credentials suspended in 2019, Vernon said. "And Eugene, his name has appeared on 6 other guardianship filings in this state in the last 2 years. 6 other filings, 6 other families. 6 other elderly people who had opened an envelope just like mine and found a stranger's name attached to a lie about their own mind. I was not the first target. I was just the first one who knew what he was looking at. 6 families. That number stayed in my chest like a stone I could not swallow. 6 other people had opened envelopes just like mine, seen a stranger's name attached to a lie about their own mind, and had no idea they were part of a pattern. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone still warm against my ear and asked Vernon to walk me through every piece of it. He did. Methodically. The way a surgeon walks you through an X-ray when the news is bad, but the information is necessary. Dr. Raymond Holt had been a licensed geriatric psychiatrist in Riverside County until 2019. That year, the California Medical Board suspended his credentials after an investigation revealed he had signed cognitive evaluations on patients he had never examined, 11 of them, across 3 facilities, all elderly, all living alone. He lost his license. He disappeared from the medical registry. And then, like a signature lifted from a dead man's hand, his name started showing up again. "Someone is using his credentials like a printing press," Vernon said. "Same license number, same formatting, same language in the evaluations, word for word in some cases. 6 guardianship filings across the state in the last 2 years, all targeting elderly homeowners." "How many of them lost their homes?" I asked. Vernon paused. "I am still counting. 6 families, 6 homes. And every single one of them was told the same thing I was told: you are losing your mind. Sign the paper. Let someone else take over. It is for your own good." I hung up and sat with that knowledge for the rest of the afternoon. The coffee went cold. The jasmine moved in the window. The house was quiet, in the way houses are quiet when you are the only person in them, and you are beginning to understand just how many people want to take that quietness away from you. The next morning, I carried the dossier to my desk and spread every page across the oak surface like a surgeon laying out instruments. I had read the medical declaration. I had read the care plan. I had read the forged power of attorney. But I had not read the appendix. I had been too angry the first time, too focused on the signature and the ghost doctor to notice what was buried behind the main documents. Page 47. A property sale plan for my bungalow, my home. The house Colleen and I bought in 1984 with a down payment made from the profit of our second year in business. Listed there in clean type a broker's market assessment, a proposed listing price, a projected closing timeline, and the name of a real estate firm in La Jolla I had never contacted. Finding that date on the sale plan was like discovering the bullet was loaded before you even walked into the room. The argument at the dinner table was never real. It was just the sound effect before the trigger pull. The preparation date printed at the bottom of the page was 3 weeks before the family dinner. 3 weeks. I read it again to make sure my eyes were not betraying me. They were not. The date was typed, not handwritten. It had been formatted and filed and printed while I was still cooking Sunday dinners for my daughter and her family, while I was asking Hadley about her classes, while I was pouring Brent a second cup of coffee, because he always wanted a second cup, and I was raised to be a good host, even to people I did not particularly like. They had not reacted to anything I said at that dinner table. They had not been provoked by my question about the doctor. The entire confrontation, Brent's rising voice, Lorraine's quiet ask for me to leave, the dossier landing between the chicken and the salad. All of it was choreographed, rehearsed, preloaded. Brent did not snap that night. He performed. I stacked the pages neatly and placed them back inside the dossier. I closed the folder and set it on the desk beside the groove where Colleen used to rest her glasses. The morning sunlight caught the broker's letterhead through the window and made it glow like a lit fuse. I picked up my phone. I did not call Lorraine. I did not call Brent. I called Vernon and said 5 words. Lock every record I own. He did not ask why. He did not hesitate. He said he would have the property freeze filed by noon. And then he said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Eugene, I pulled the court index this morning. There is a preliminary filing attached to your name that predates the sale plan. Someone moved on your assets before they ever sat down at your table. Vernon had the county registrar on hold before I finished parking my truck outside his Bankers Hill office. He had already drafted the freeze order and needed only my signature to seal every deed. Title and transfer document attached to my name. I signed it at his mahogany desk with a pen that felt heavier than it should have. Vernon filed it electronically while I watched the confirmation chime on his monitor. Just like that. Every property record I owned was locked behind a legal wall that Brent could not climb over without both of us knowing. The moment this is filed, nobody moves a comma on your property without triggering a flag, Vernon said. He set down his coffee and folded his hands the way he does when he is organizing bad news into deliverable sentences. Now, there is something else. He turned his monitor toward me. On the screen was a court filing I had never seen. A preliminary petition to freeze my assets, submitted to the San Diego County Superior Court through a legal aid processing service. The petitioner's name was Brent Caldwell. The filing date was August 29th. I stared at the date and felt the room tilt slightly, the way it does when something you thought was solid turns out to be hollow underneath. 23 days, Vernon said quietly. He filed the legal paperwork 23 days before he sat at your table and told you he was concerned about your health. 23 days. I had already found the property sale plan, dated 3 weeks before dinner. But this was earlier. This was the legal machinery starting to move before Brent had even bothered to rehearse his speech about my prescriptions and my stove. When someone you trusted files legal paperwork to take your home 3 weeks before they bother to look you in the eye, that is not a family disagreement. That is a premeditated ambush. Walk me through the sequence, I said. Vernon picked up his pen and drew a timeline on the legal pad between us. August 29th, preliminary asset freeze petition filed. Early September property sale plan, prepared with broker assessment and projected closing date. September 21st, the family dinner where Brent produced the dossier and called me incompetent. September 22nd, the certified letter with the forged power of attorney delivered to my door. 4 steps. Each one built on the last. Each one designed to move faster than an old man could react. He filed the petition through a legal aid service, Vernon said, not his own attorney. A processing company that handles bulk filings, the kind of outfit that does not ask questions as long as the paperwork is formatted correctly. Who formatted it? Vernon tapped his pen against the filing date on the screen. That is what I am trying to find out. The petition uses identical legal language to the 6 other filings I flagged yesterday. Same structure, same phrasing, same citation format. Someone gave Brent a template. I thought about August 29th. I tried to remember what I had been doing that day. Watering Colleen's jasmine, probably. Feeding the neighbor's cat while she was visiting her sister in Tucson. Reading the newspaper on the porch. Living my ordinary life in my ordinary house while my son-in-law was sitting at a computer somewhere filing papers to take it all away from me. The coffee Vernon poured me had gone cold. The morning light through the slatted blinds cut his desk into strips of gold and shadow. I ran my thumb along the armrest of the visitor chair and felt the leather creak under the pressure. The dinner was not the beginning, I said. Vernon shook his head. The sale plan was not the beginning either. No. The dinner was step 2, I said. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every one of my 72 years settle into my knees. What was step 1? Vernon leaned back in his chair and set his pen down. He looked at me the way he looks at a case file when the pattern is clear, but the evidence is not yet complete. If the petition was step 2 and the dinner was step 3, then step 1 was whoever convinced Brent this would work in the first place, he said. Someone fed him the doctor's name. Someone gave him the legal template. Someone walked him through the entire process and told him it was foolproof. I already knew who. A man in a soft gray cardigan who had visited my bungalow 3 months earlier. A man who called himself a senior wellness advisor and asked careful questions about my routine, my medication, my finances. A man who left behind a glossy brochure and a business card that smelled of cologne and ended up in my recycling bin the same evening. I had thrown away his brochure, but I had not thrown away his name. And now that name was the thread I was going to pull until the entire operation unraveled. I had barely started pulling the thread on Kirk Bentley when the thread pulled back. The phone rang at 7:12 the next morning, early enough to feel like an ambush, late enough that the man on the other end had probably rehearsed what he was going to say. Brent's name glowed on the screen. I poured my coffee, set the mug on the counter without drinking it, and answered. "Dad," he said, and the word came out coated in the same rehearsed warmth he used at dinner parties. "Look, I know the other night got heated. That was my fault. I should have handled it better." I said nothing. "The plan is really for your benefit," he continued, speaking slowly, spacing the words the way people do when they think the person listening cannot keep up. "We just want to make sure you are protected. That is all this has ever been about." I held the phone against my ear and watched the steam rise from my untouched coffee. The jasmine was blooming outside the cracked kitchen window. A mourning dove sat on the power line across the street, patient and still. "All you have to do is sign the papers and this whole thing goes away quietly," Brent said. "No courts, no strangers involved, just family taking care of family." I let the silence stretch. 3 seconds. 5. 10. I could hear him breathing on the other end. The faint rustle of his sleeve against the phone. The click of what sounded like a pen cap being flipped open and shut. Silence on a phone call is a mirror. It forces the other person to look at the ugliness of their own words bouncing back at them without anywhere to hide. Most people cannot tolerate it for more than 15 seconds. Brent lasted 12. Dad? Are you there? I was there. I was more there than I had been in years. I need you to understand something, he said. And the warmth was gone now. The soft voice evaporated like steam off pavement. What replaced it was flat, clipped, and cold, the real voice beneath the performance. If you will not sign voluntarily, I will file a petition with the court. A judge will look at the medical evaluation and make the decision for you. Is that what you want, strangers deciding where you live? I still said nothing. My coffee was cooling on the counter. The morning light through the blinds cut lines across my hand. You are 72 years old, he said. The court will see a concerned family acting in your best interest. What will they see from you? A stubborn old man who cannot accept reality? Let me ask you something. If someone threatened to put you in a facility and take your home, would you fight them with your voice? Or would you let them walk straight into the trap you already set? Brent was still talking. He was explaining how the process would work, how painless it would be, how the judge would certainly side with the medical documentation. He used the word dignity twice, as if the concept belonged to him. He said this is not personal 4 separate times, which is something people only say when it is deeply, specifically personal. I cataloged every word. Not because I needed to remember them, I would not forget a syllable of this conversation for the rest of my life. I cataloged them because each one was a brick in the case Vernon and I were building. Thoughts delivered over a phone line to an elderly homeowner about seizing his property through a court petition based on forged medical documents. If Brent had known what he was constructing with his own words, he would have hung up after the first sentence. He finished his speech. He waited for me to crumble. I took a slow breath. I looked at the kitchen window where Colleen's jasmine pressed against the glass. I thought about August 29th when this man filed papers to take my home while I was watering those same flowers. Go ahead and file it, I said. 3 seconds of dead air. Then the line went quiet. He hung up without another word. I pressed the red button and set the phone face down on the cool countertop. Brent thought he had just delivered an ultimatum. He thought my silence was the sound of a frightened old man calculating the cost of surrender. He had no idea that every single word he had spoken was exactly what I needed him to say. Because tomorrow, I was going to sit across from a woman who had already lost everything to the same people whispering in his ear. Vernon had found her name buried in one of those 6 other filings. She was 74 years old. She was a retired teacher, and 8 months ago, someone had used the same forged documents to take her house. Vernon had found her name in the court records, one of the 6 filings that matched the pattern. He made the introduction by phone. She agreed to meet me at a cafe in Hillcrest the next morning. And when I walked through the door of the Sunrise Cafe on day 5, she was already there. Estelle Garrett was 74 years old, a retired American history teacher with silver hair pinned neatly behind her ears and hands wrapped around a coffee cup like she was trying to hold herself together. She sat in the corner booth with her back to the wall, the way people sit when they have learned the hard way that the threat can come from any direction. She was guarded. Vernon had told her only that a man with a similar experience wanted to talk. She studied my face the way a teacher studies a new student looking for tells, looking for lies. I sat across from her and ordered black coffee I did not intend to drink. Then I told her my story. Not all of it, just the parts that mattered. A man visited my home 3 months ago and called himself a senior wellness advisor. A few weeks later, my son-in-law had a dossier declaring me mentally incompetent, signed by a doctor I had never met. Estelle set her coffee down so carefully it did not make a sound. "What was the doctor's name?" she asked. "Raymond Holt." Her posture changed. It was not dramatic. She did not gasp or flinch. She simply went very still, the way a person goes still when they hear a name that rewrote their entire life. There is a particular cruelty reserved for stealing from the elderly. It does not just take what they own. It erases the proof that they ever earned it. It turns a lifetime of work into a signature on a page they never signed. A diagnosis from a doctor they never met. A courtroom ruling they never understood until it was too late. "Tell me," I said. Estelle told me. 8 months ago, a man visited her home. He wore a cardigan and carried a clipboard, and said he was conducting routine wellness screenings for seniors in the neighborhood. He asked about her health, her memory, her finances. She answered politely because she was raised the same way I was, to be courteous to strangers who knock on your door. Weeks later, her nephew, a man she had not spoken to in 3 years after a bitter inheritance dispute, filed a guardianship petition. The paperwork was identical to mine. Same legal language, same formatting, same doctor's name on the medical certification. "They told the judge I could not remember my own address," she said, and her voice had the careful flatness of someone who has told this story before and has learned to tell it without crying. "I taught American history for 31 years. I can recite every president in order." The court granted temporary guardianship. Within 60 days, her house was sold. A 3-bedroom home she had paid off in 1998. Gone. Title transferred. Keys handed to a stranger. I watched her hands shake around that coffee cup, and I saw Colleen. I saw every patient we had ever protected in our facilities. I saw what would happen to me if I had not spent 50 years learning how the system worked. If I had been a retired teacher instead of a retired founder. If I had not recognized a ghost name on a forged document. "I live in a 400-square-foot studio now," Estelle said. "My nephew got his money, and I got a folding table and a hot plate." She looked at me across the booth, and her eyes were dry, but her hands were not. "They used the same doctor's name on mine. The exact same name." The coffee between us had gone cold. The morning light through the cafe windows caught the silver in her hair and made it glow. A spoon clinked against ceramic somewhere behind us. The smell of warm pastry drifted from the counter, sweet and ordinary, the kind of smell that belongs to a world where people do not get robbed by their own families. I reached across the table and placed my calloused hand over Estelle's trembling fingers. I told her that I was not just another victim. I told her that the people who took her home had made one critical mistake. They had chosen their next target from the very industry that built the locks they were picking. I did not tell her about the trust. Not yet. That was not a card you play over coffee with a stranger, no matter how much you trust her pain. But I promised her something I had not promised anyone in 11 years. I am going to get your house back. I drove home from the Sunrise Cafe with Estelle's trembling hand still imprinted on my memory, and a promise sitting in my chest like a loaded round. I had told a stranger I would get her house back. Now I had to mean it. The doorbell rang at 6:15 the next evening, and I knew before I opened it that it would be my daughter because only family rings twice and then knocks. Lorraine stood on the porch holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil, the steam still curling from beneath the edges. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She wore the expression I had seen on her face exactly twice before, once when she was 12 and broke the kitchen window, and once when she called to tell me Colleen was not going to wake up. "I brought dinner," she said. "Chicken and rosemary. Your recipe." I opened the door wider and let her in. The evening jasmine from the porch trellis followed her through the doorway like a ghost. She set the dish on the counter with a ceramic clink and stood there with her arms folded, not sitting down, not looking at me, rehearsing something behind her eyes. "Brent went too far," she said finally. "I know that. But Dad, he is scared for you. We both are." I put the kettle on. I did not answer. I let her keep talking the way I had let Brent keep talk on the phone, because people who are lying always fill silence with more lies. And each one tells you something the last one did not. "That was supposed to be a conversation, not an ambush," she said. "It got away from us." "Scared enough to bring a dossier to a family dinner?" I said, pouring water into 2 cups. She flinched. Not at the question, at the word dossier. It told me she had known about it before that night. She had seen it before Brent placed it on the table. The ambush was not his alone. There is nothing lonelier than watching your child lie to you and realizing she has been practicing. I handed her the tea and sat across from her at the kitchen table. The same table. The same chairs. The casserole smelled like my own recipe, rosemary and garlic. The one Colleen taught her when she was 16. And I wondered whether Lorraine had chosen it on purpose, as a kind of emotional shorthand for "please forgive me," without having to say the words. I let the silence work. I sipped chamomile that had steeped too long and gone bitter. Then I set the cup down and asked the question I had been holding since Vernon showed me the court filing timeline. "Who told you a competency evaluation was necessary?" I said. "That is a very specific legal step. Most families do not know it exists." Lorraine's hands tightened around her mug. She looked at the table. She looked at the window. Then she looked at me. And I watched the rehearsed version of the answer collide with the truth in the space behind her eyes. "Kirk, Mr. Bentley," she said. "He is a senior care consultant. He said it is completely routine for someone your age managing that kind of portfolio." The name landed in the room like a grenade with a delayed fuse. Kirk Bentley. The man in the soft gray cardigan. The man who had sat in my kitchen 3 months ago and asked about my medication. The man whose glossy brochure I had thrown in the recycling. A name is just a word until it connects 2 crimes. Then it becomes a fuse. I did not react. I did not blink. I picked up the kettle and poured Lorraine more tea. "More tea," I said. She froze. She knew she had said something she was not supposed to say. I could see it in the way her fingers went white around the ceramic. But I did not press. I changed the subject to Hadley asked about her classes, her grades, whether she was still reading those history books. Lorraine answered in short, distracted sentences, her mind clearly replaying her own slip. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing that mattered. Then she stood, kissed my cheek, and said she would come back on the weekend. I walked her to the door and kissed her forehead the way I had when she was 9, standing on her tiptoes, holding my sleeves. Her taillights turned left at the end of the block and disappeared behind the jacaranda trees. I stood in the kitchen, alone. The casserole was cooling on the counter. The chamomile was cold. The house was quiet. I pulled a grocery receipt from the drawer by the phone and picked up a pen. I wrote 2 words on the back in block letters. Kirk Bentley. The man who had taken Estelle Garrett's house had been sitting in my daughter's living room, and my daughter had just handed me his name without even knowing what she had done. I brought the grocery receipt to Vernon's office the next morning and placed it on his desk like it was a loaded weapon. Because by then, it was. 2 words in block letters, the name my daughter had handed me without knowing what it meant. Vernon had already been pulling threads. He turned his monitor toward me and showed me what he had found overnight. Kirk Bentley's consulting firm was registered as Coastal Senior Solutions, LLC. The business address was Suite 14B at a pack and ship store in Kearney Mesa. Vernon had pulled up the storefront on Google Street View, a strip mall between a nail salon and a check-cashing place. No office, no employees, no website, no professional license on file with the state. "It is a mailbox," Vernon said. "The entire company is a rented mailbox and a filing fee." He slid a printout across the desk. The same LLC appeared in the court filings from Estelle Garrett's case. Same registered agent. Same formation date. Same address. They had not even changed the name between victims. When a predator gets lazy, it is not because he has grown careless. It is because no one has ever made him pay for being sloppy. Kirk Bentley had run this operation for years and never once encountered a target who knew what they were looking at. He had gotten comfortable, and comfortable predators leave trails. "They did not think anyone would look," I said. "They were right," Vernon said. "Until you." He reached for his coffee, and the wall clock behind him ticked 3 times before he spoke again. "There is something else. It came in this morning." A knock on the office door interrupted him. His secretary handed him a manila envelope with a court seal pressed into the flap. Vernon opened it, read the first page, and set it down on the desk between us with the care of a man handling something volatile. Brent had filed. The formal guardianship petition was stamped and docketed in San Diego County Superior Court. The preliminary hearing was set for October 7th. 9 days out. My son-in-law had done exactly what I told him to do on that phone call. He had gone ahead and filed it. Vernon picked up his pen and clicked it open. "I can have a motion to dismiss drafted by this afternoon. We file the shell company evidence, the suspended license, the forged power of attorney. The judge will throw it out before Brent finishes his opening statement." "No," I said. Vernon's pen stopped clicking. What kind of man reads his own guardianship petition and smiles? The kind who has spent 50 years in an industry built on patience. The kind who knows that the best way to defeat a trap is not to avoid it, it is to walk in, let it close, and then show everyone in the room that you were never the one who was caught. "Do not block the hearing," I said. I leaned forward in the cold metal client chair and looked at Vernon the way I look at people when I need them to understand that what I am saying is not a suggestion. Let it happen. I want them to walk into that courtroom believing they have already won. Vernon set his pen down. He folded his hands on the desk the way he does when he is about to argue and then decides not to. The morning light through the Venetian blinds cast striped shadows across the petition between us. "You want Brent to present his entire case," he said slowly. "The forged evaluation, the fabricated diagnosis, all of it, on the record, under oath, every word of it. And then I want you to take everything we have, the suspended license, the shell company, the other victims, the predated filings, and lay it on the table while the judge is still looking at the forgery Brent just submitted as evidence." Vernon stared at me for a long time. The clock ticked. The coffee machine in the corner gurgled and went silent. A car horn sounded on the street below, faint and irrelevant. Then he picked up his pen again, closed the petition folder, and asked the only question that mattered. "What exactly are you planning to do in that courtroom?" I told him. I was going to let my son-in-law stand up in front of a judge and prove with forged documents, a ghost doctor, and a shell company that I was mentally incompetent. I was going to sit in silence while he built his case on a foundation of fraud. And then, when he was finished, when every lie was on the record and every exit was sealed, I was going to show them all what competence looks like. Vernon nodded once. Then he unlocked his desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad. 9 days, he said. Let us get to work. We spent 9 days preparing. Vernon assembled the evidence into 5 folders, each one organized for maximum courtroom impact. I spent those nights staring at the ceiling and rehearsing the hardest performance of my life, doing absolutely nothing. Brent walked into that courtroom the way men walk into rooms they believe they own. Shoulders back, briefcase swinging, smile already rehearsed for the judge. He wore the Navy suit. He always wore the Navy suit. His attorney, a slim man in his 40s with a haircut that cost more than my truck payment, held the door for him like he was royalty arriving at his own coronation. I was already seated at the respondent's table in my plain khaki shirt and worn trousers. Vernon sat beside me with his briefcase closed and his hands folded. We looked like 2 men who had come to lose quietly. Judge Whitfield entered through the side door, a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s who read every document twice before speaking once. He settled his reading glasses low on his nose and nodded for the proceedings to begin. Brent's attorney opened with the medical evaluation. He held it up like a sacred text. The forged signature, the fabricated diagnosis. He read passages aloud with the gravity of a man reciting scripture, pausing at key phrases, significant cognitive decline, inability to manage personal and financial affairs, immediate appointment of a guardian recommended. Then Brent took the stand. If you have ever watched someone lie about you in a room full of strangers and had to sit perfectly still, you understand what discipline actually costs. It is not about controlling your anger. Anger is easy to hold. It is about controlling the part of you that wants to stand up and tell the truth so badly your teeth ache from clenching. This is not about money, Brent said, and his voice cracked on the word money with the precision of a man who had practiced the crack in front of a mirror. This is about a man I love who can no longer care for himself and who refuses to admit it. He described me the way you describe a broken appliance. He mentioned the missed prescription refill. He mentioned the dinner where I had supposedly become confused and hostile. He referenced my simple clothing and my old truck as though they were symptoms of a disease rather than choices made by a man who knew exactly what he was doing with every dollar he did not spend. The judge reviewed the documents. He asked questions. He made notes. Lorraine sat in the gallery 3 rows back, gripping her purse strap with both hands, her eyes moving between her husband on the stand and her father at the respondent's table. She looked like a woman trying to stand in 2 doorways at once. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Whitfield said, turning to our table, "do you or your counsel wish to respond at this time?" The courtroom went still. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. Brent's cologne drifted across the aisle, sharp and expensive. I kept my hands folded in my lap and did not move. Vernon stood slowly. His chair scraped against the marble floor, the only sound in the room. "Your Honor, we request a continuance of 14 days to arrange an independent medical evaluation," he said. "We have no objections to file at this time." No objections. No rebuttal. No cross-examination. Nothing. Silence in a courtroom is either the sound of defeat or the sound of a door locking from the inside, and Brett could not tell which one he was hearing. I watched him lean toward his attorney and whisper something I did not need to hear to understand. That is it, he is not even going to fight. The judge granted the continuance. The hearing adjourned. The bailiff announced the next case, and the courtroom began to empty the way rooms empty after something uncomfortable quickly, with eyes averted. Lorraine caught me in the hallway. She was half running in her heels, her purse swinging. "Dad?" she said. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at her. I looked at the courtroom door still swinging shut behind me. I looked at Brent standing 20 feet away with his attorney, his smile tighter than it had been when he walked in. I did not answer her. I walked past Lorraine without stopping. I walked past Brent and his attorney without looking. I pushed through the courthouse doors into the September sun and crossed the parking lot to my truck. The steering wheel was warm from sitting in the heat. The dashboard clock read 11:14. I sat there for 11 minutes. I did not turn the engine on. I did not call Vernon. I watched the clock tick, and I thought about the man in the Navy suit who had just told a judge I could not manage my own life. In 14 days, he was going to find out exactly how wrong he was. I drove home from that courthouse parking lot knowing exactly what I needed to do next. The preliminary hearing had gone precisely as planned. Brent had committed every lie to the record. Now it was time to load the weapon he did not know existed. The bookshelf in my home office weighs 200 pounds and swings on a single pivot bolt that Colleen and I installed ourselves in 2003. From the outside, it looks like what it is supposed to look like. A retired man's collection of dusty agricultural manuals and old medical journals nobody has opened in a decade. But behind it, built into the wall between the studs, sits a fireproof vault with a combination dial I have turned so many times the numbers are worn smooth. I pulled the bookshelf forward. The hinges ground against the hardwood floor. The vault clicked open, and the smell hit me first. Old paper, leather binder covers, and something else, something faint. Colleen's perfume. 11 years, and the vault still held it like a secret. Vernon arrived 20 minutes later. I had called him from the truck. He walked into the office and stopped in the doorway, staring at the open vault the way a man stares at a room he has only ever seen described on paper. Inside the vault, 19 years of quarterly reports, financial statements, licensing agreements, inspection records, correspondence with facility directors across 6 counties, all of it organized by facility name, all of it current, all of it bearing the signature controlling beneficiary. Me. People assume that wealth looks like marble floors and German cars. They never suspect the man in the $30 shirt who built every lock in the building. I pulled a binder from the top shelf and handed it to Vernon. He opened it, and his eyes moved across the quarterly totals the way a pilot's eyes move across an instrument panel, fast, precise, recalibrating everything he thought he knew. 12 facilities, I said. 4,000 beds. Every one of them named after Colleen. Vernon closed the binder slowly. He set it on the desk beside the framed photograph of my wife that has faced the vault door since the day I built it. You have been the majority stakeholder in Southern California's largest independent elder care network for 19 years, he said. And your own son-in-law filed a competency petition because he thinks you are a confused old man in a bungalow. That is exactly what I needed him to think. The room was quiet. The vault door hung open. The quarterly reports sat in their neat rows like soldiers waiting for orders. Vernon looked at me across the desk, and I saw the question forming before he asked it. What do you want to do with all of this? I had been thinking about that question since the moment Brent placed the dossier on my dinner table. I had been thinking about it while I sat in silence at the preliminary hearing, while I drove past the pharmacy and the taco shop and the school where Lorraine learned to read. I had been thinking about it every night, while I talked to Colleen's photograph in the dark. Colleen would have hated this part. The part where I used what we built together as a blade instead of a shield. She was the one who believed in mercy first, consequences second. But Colleen had never met Kirk Bentley. She had never watched her own daughter look at the floor instead of looking at her father. She had never read a forged signature with her own name on it. Kirk Bentley sold consulting services to at least 3 of our facilities, I said. His company is in our vendor registry under a different name. If his invoices are in our books, we have a paper trail that leads straight back to Brent. Vernon understood immediately. The vendor audit would not just expose Bentley's shell company. It would prove that the fraud ring had been operating inside the very network I owned. Every invoice, every contract, every payment would become evidence. And because I controlled the network, the audit was mine to order. Order an audit of every vendor in our network, I said. Start with the ones Brent recommended. Vernon nodded once. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. I closed the vault, swung the bookshelf back into place, and stood in the center of my office, surrounded by the quiet evidence of everything Colleen and I had built. The last thing she ever said to me was this: protect the people who cannot protect themselves. I had kept that promise every day since she died. I had kept it in 12 facilities across Southern California, in 4,000 beds, in every safety standard, and every vendor review, and every patient who went to sleep knowing someone was watching over them. Now I was going to keep it in a courtroom. The audit came back in 36 hours. Vernon called me at 7 in the morning and told me to come to his office immediately. When I walked in, he was staring at his monitor the way a man stares at a car wreck he cannot look away from. The first line item hit like a brick. Coastal Senior Solutions, LLC. The shell company behind Kirk Bentley's operation, the rented mailbox in Kearney Mesa, the hollow consulting firm with no staff and no website. It appeared in our vendor registry under a slightly different filing name, but the registered agent was identical. The same entity, the same address, the same man. And my company had denied it a vendor license in 2017. Failed your safety audit twice, Vernon said, scrolling through the records. Insufficient credentialing, no liability insurance on file. Your compliance team flagged it and rejected the application. The denial letter has your signature on it. I remembered the letter. I remembered signing it. I signed dozens of vendor rejections every year. It was part of running a network built on the principle that no one got through the door without meeting Colleen's standards. I had not thought about Coastal Senior Solutions in 8 years, but Kirk Bentley had thought about me. There is a special kind of evil that only works on people who have already outlived the person who would have fought for them. Kirk Bentley had taken the rejection and turned it into a blueprint. He could not get inside my network through the front door, so he built a machine to go around it, targeting the elderly, forging documents, exploiting family members who were willing to trade loyalty for money. And when Brent walked into his life looking for a way to control his father-in-law's assets, Bentley had handed him the keys to the very system I had locked him out of. He did not just want revenge, Vernon said quietly. He built an operation to do to other families what he could not do to yours. Until your son-in-law opened the door, Vernon's paralegal had spent the previous afternoon cross-referencing the shell company's billing records with guardianship filings across San Diego County. The results were on Vernon's screen in a spreadsheet that scrolled well past the bottom of the monitor. 23 cases. 23 guardianship petitions filed over 4 years. Every one of them used the same forged doctor. Every one of them involved a compliant family member, a nephew, a son-in-law, a distant cousin who filed the paperwork and collected when the property was sold. Every one of them followed the identical playbook: care advisor visit, fabricated evaluation, fast guardianship, home liquidated within 60 days. Vernon put Estelle on speakerphone. Her voice came through, crackling and thin, but steady. "I told you I was not the only one," she said. "I told you there were others." 23 names on a spreadsheet. And every one of them was somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody who thought their family would protect them. Sometimes who opened their front door to a man in a cardigan and answered his questions because they were raised to be polite. I stared at the list. My hand was trembling, and I did not try to stop it. I had spent 50 years building a system to protect people like these. And a man I had rejected from that system had spent 4 years preying on the very people I had sworn to keep safe. The coffee on Vernon's desk had gone cold. The afternoon sun cut through the blinds and striped the printout with bars of light. I could hear traffic on the street below, muted and irrelevant. "This is not a family matter anymore," I said. "This is organized crime." Vernon nodded. He did not argue. He did not qualify. He reached for his pen and started writing. I asked him to print the list. He did. 23 names in 12-point font on a single sheet of white paper. I read every one of them. Some had first names that reminded me of patients Colleen and I had cared for in the early years. Some had last names I recognized from neighborhoods I had canvassed when we were building our second facility. Some were just names, strangers who had no idea that the man reading their file in a Bankers Hill law office had spent his entire adult life trying to prevent exactly what had happened to them. I folded the list once and put it in my shirt pocket, next to the grocery receipt with Kirk Bentley's name. Then I asked Vernon one more question. "How old is the youngest victim on this list?" He checked. She was 68, Colleen's age when she died. I did not learn what happened that evening until much later, but when my granddaughter finally told me, she told it almost word for word, the way she had memorized it standing in that hallway, and she remembered every detail. The light, the sound, the exact moment she stopped being a child. Hadley Caldwell was 15 years old, a quiet sophomore with my steady hands and her mother's habit of listening before speaking. She had come downstairs for a glass of water, a biology textbook tucked under her arm, bare feet silent on the hardwood. The hallway that led to the kitchen was dark. The kitchen was not. She heard her father before she saw him. Brent was pacing his shadow, sliding back and forth across the tile like a pendulum winding tighter with every pass. Lorraine sat motionless at the island counter, a stemless glass of wine untouched in front of her, condensation pooling on the granite. "He sat there for 2 hours and did not say a word," Brent said. His voice was the voice Hadley had never heard before, not the careful consultant's voice he used at dinner parties, not the coaching voice he used at her soccer games. This was something underneath, something that had been there all along, waiting for a closed door. "That is not a man who has given up. That is a man who is planning something." Lorraine did not look up. "Maybe we should just drop this. He is my father. Brent." "Drop it." He stopped pacing. The word came out flat, like a door slamming. "You want to drop it. I am saying, maybe this has gone too far." Brent's palm hit the countertop so hard the wine glass jumped. Lorraine flinched. In the hallway, Hadley pressed her back against the wall and held the textbook against her chest like a shield. The moment a child stops seeing her father as a hero is not dramatic. It is just quiet and permanent. "Your father is sitting on a fortune in a house that does not even have central air," Brent said. "Once we get past the full hearing, everything ours. Everything he has, the property, the accounts, whatever he has been hiding. And you want to drop it because you feel guilty about a man who has not called you in 2 weeks." Hadley did not understand everything she was hearing. She did not know what a blind trust was. She did not know about the guardianship petition, or the forged documents, or the man named Kirk who had set all of it in motion. But she understood the word, ours. She understood the way her father said it, not like a man discussing a family matter, but like a man counting money that did not belong to him. She reached into the pocket of her pajama pants and pulled out her phone. Her fingers were trembling. The screen glowed in the dark hallway, and she cupped her hand over it to hide the light. She found the voice recorder, pressed the red circle, and held the phone flat against the door frame with the microphone aimed at the kitchen. The faint digital chirp of the recording starting was swallowed by Brent's next sentence. Kirk said the evaluation alone is enough, he continued, unaware. The judge has no reason to question a licensed doctor's signature. We have the continuance, we have the filing, and we have 60 days after the ruling to begin the transfer. This is not complicated, Lorraine. This is arithmetic. She was 15. She did not know what a licensed doctor's signature meant in this context, but she knew what a lie sounded like. She had been raised by one. Lorraine's voice came next, barely above a whisper. What if Dad finds out about Kirk? The takeout containers on the counter had gone cold. The smell of garlic and soy sauce drifted into the hallway where Hadley stood frozen, the textbook spine digging into her ribs. Her lower lip caught between her teeth until she tasted salt. Your father cannot find out about Kirk, Brent said. And now his voice carried something worse than anger. It carried certainty. Because your father does not know what century it is. That is the whole point. The recording timer on Hadley's phone read 1 minute, 43 seconds. She kept holding it against the door frame. Brent kept talking about timelines, about the hearing, about how the consultant had guaranteed everything would hold up in court. Lorraine said nothing. The ice in her wine glass shifted once. A small sound like something breaking very slowly. Hadley backed up the hallway 1 step at a time, bare feet finding each board without a creak. Phone still recording. She reached the staircase and climbed to her room without making a sound. She closed the door. She sat on her bed with the bedspread bunched under her fists and stared at the phone screen. The recording timer read 2 minutes and 47 seconds, still counting. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she had not called in weeks. Grandpa. My phone rang at 6 in the morning. The screen said Hadley. She had not called me in weeks, not since the dinner, not since her mother stopped returning my messages. I answered, and heard my granddaughter crying before she said a single word. She told me everything. The hallway, the voices, the recording. She played it for me over the phone, and I sat in my office chair with my eyes closed and listened to my son-in-law describe exactly what he planned to do with everything Colleen and I had built. His voice was perfectly steady. My granddaughter's voice was shaking. And that was the part that broke me. Vernon arrived by 8. I played Hadley's recording through the phone speaker and watched his face change the way a surgeon's face changes when the scan confirms what he already suspected. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, Brent's voice filling the small office, bouncing off the bookshelf that hid the vault, landing on the framed photograph of Colleen like an insult. When it ended, Vernon set his pen down. California is a 2-party consent state, he said. But there are narrow exceptions courts have recognized for recordings that document abuse. I believe what your granddaughter recorded gives us enough to argue it. I looked at the phone on my desk. The waveform of Brent's voice was frozen on the screen, a jagged line that looked exactly like what it was. A confession. I do not want to defend myself tomorrow, I said. I want to dismantle them. Vernon nodded. He pulled his legal pad closer and began writing. The audit results, the shell company, the victim list folded in my shirt pocket, and now the recording of 15-year-old girl's trembling hand holding a phone against a door frame, while her father confessed to everything. How do you prepare to destroy your own son-in-law in a courtroom when your daughter is sitting in the gallery? You do it the way you build anything that matters. One piece at a time, and you do not look away from what it costs. We present the audit first, Vernon said. Then the shell company registration. Then the victim list, all 23 names. And then the recording. By the time we are done, Brent will not be fighting for guardianship. He will be fighting to stay out of prison. His pen scratched across the legal pad. I watched the bullet points accumulate, each one a door that would close behind Brent and never open again. Vernon worked for 2 hours. I sat across from him and said nothing. The way I had sat in silence at the preliminary hearing, the way Colleen used to sit beside me when I was building something, and she knew better than to interrupt. Before I tell you what happened the next morning in that courtroom, I need to ask, are you still with me? Comment whether you think Brent deserves prison or just losing everything, and tell me why in a few words. Please note the next part includes some dramatized details to convey the emotional weight of what happened. The truth underneath is what matters. Vernon left at 10. I locked the front door behind him and stood in the hallway, listening to the house settle the way it always did at night, the creak of old joists, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the kitchen clock Colleen had bought at a swap meet in 1994. 11 years I had been talking to a photograph, and not once in all that time had I ever had this much to say. I walked back to the office and sat down in front of Colleen's picture. The silver frame was cool under my thumb. The lamp cast a single circle of light around her face and left everything else in shadow. I found the people who are hurting them. Colleen, I said. 23 families, the same playbook every time. And our granddaughter recorded her own father admitting all of it. She is braver than any of us. The house was silent. The night air came through the cracked window, carrying the smell of jasmine from the bush she had planted the year we moved in. The lavender sachet she kept in the desk drawer still held its scent after all this time. Faint and stubborn, like everything she left behind. I touched the glass over her face. Tomorrow. I set the photograph back on the desk, turned off the lamp, and stood in the dark for a long time. In the morning, I would put on the same plain clothes Brent had mocked at that dinner table. I would drive to the courthouse in the same truck, and I would show them exactly what a competent man looks like when he stops pretending to be harmless. Tomorrow came. But before I tell you about the courtroom, I need to tell you about something that happened 4 days earlier. Something Brent never knew about. Something Vernon and I had kept sealed in a locked drawer like a loaded round waiting for the right chamber. 4 days before the hearing. While Brent was still celebrating the preliminary continuance, I was sitting in a psychiatrist's office on the 7th floor of a medical building in Mission Valley, answering questions designed to prove I had lost my mind. Dr. Margaret Calloway was a board-certified forensic neuropsychologist in her late 50s, with 30 years of practice and a reputation for evaluations that judges treated as settled science. Vernon had selected her specifically because her credentials were unimpeachable, and her reports were built like engineering blueprints, precise, thorough, impossible to discredit on cross-examination. She tested me for 3 hours. Memory recall sequences of numbers forward and backward. Lists of words repeated after increasing intervals. Details from paragraphs read aloud once. Executive function sorting tasks. Pattern recognition. Problem solving under time pressure. Financial reasoning, the structure of trusts. Fiduciary obligations. Tax implications of asset transfers. Spatial cognition block designs. Figure copying. Mental rotation. I completed every module. I did not miss a single item. The trick to beating a man who thinks you are stupid is not proving him wrong. It is letting him say it under oath first. Dr. Calloway set her pen down at the end of the 3rd hour. She looked at me across the testing table the way a mechanic looks at an engine that just passed inspection without a single fault code. Mr. Mercer, can you walk me through the financial structure of a blind trust and explain who holds fiduciary responsibility? She asked. I can do better than that, I said. I can tell you how to build one from scratch. I have done it twice. She wrote for a long time after that. When she finished, she looked up and said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Mr. Mercer, In 30 years of practice, I have rarely seen cognitive scores this high in any age group. The evaluation was sealed, stamped confidential, and delivered to Vernon's office in a manila envelope with red ink across the front. Vernon locked it in his desk drawer on day 9, and it had been sitting there ever since. Through the audit, through the victim list, through Hadley's recording, through every piece of evidence that had accumulated like snow on a roof that was about to collapse. A sealed envelope in a locked drawer does not look like much. But that envelope was the difference between a guardianship petition and a felony referral. On day 13, after I had listened to Hadley's recording and spent the morning with Vernon planning the hearing strategy, he pulled out the envelope and set it on the desk between us. It sat there like a verdict that had already been written. "If we file this now," Vernon said, "Brent's attorney pivots. He changes the argument. He finds a new angle. We lose the trap." I understood. The evaluation was not just proof that I was competent. It was proof that Brent's entire case was built on a lie, a forged document from a doctor whose license had been suspended, contradicted by a legitimate evaluation from one of the most respected neuropsychologists in Southern California. But its power depended on timing. If Brent's attorney saw it before the hearing, he would abandon the incompetency claim and reframe the entire petition. The forged evaluation would quietly disappear from the record. The fraud would be covered. "So we let him commit," I said. "We let him stand up in front of a judge and argue that you are mentally unfit based on a fabricated medical document," Vernon said. "We let him put his name behind it. We let his attorney enter it into evidence. And then we open this." He held up the sealed envelope. "We deploy this tomorrow, not a second before." Vernon locked the drawer and pocketed the key. I sat across from him and looked at the evidence stacked on his desk. The audit trail, the shell company records, the list of 23 names folded in my shirt pocket, Hadley's recording saved on my phone, and now a forensic evaluation that made the forged documents look like crayon on construction paper. Tomorrow, every piece would land on the same table, in the same courtroom, in front of the same judge who had watched me sit in silence 2 weeks earlier. And Brent Caldwell would not see a single one of them coming. I was already sitting in the respondent's chair when Brent walked in. Same plain khaki shirt, same quiet hands folded on the table. Same man he thought he had already beaten. He glanced at me the way you glance at a piece of furniture you have already decided to sell. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and recycled air. Lorraine sat in the gallery 3 rows back, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Estelle Garrett sat upright in the last row, alone, watching the proceedings the way a woman watches when she has already lived through the outcome once, and is waiting to see if it happens to someone else. Brent's attorney stood first. He was polished dark suit, practiced cadence, every sentence calibrated for the bench. "Your Honor, Mr. Mercer's silence at the preliminary hearing speaks for itself," he said. "He offered no rebuttal, no independent evaluation, no evidence of competence." The medical assessment conducted by Dr. Raymond Holt remains uncontested. We ask the court to grant full guardianship and authorize immediate management of the respondent's financial affairs. Judge Whitfield wrote something on his pad and gestured for Brent to take the stand. Brent crossed the marble floor in leather shoes that clicked with every step. He sat in the witness chair the way a man sits when he believes the room belongs to him. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked at the judge. He did not look at me. "He wore the same clothes today that he wore 2 weeks ago," Brent said. "He drives a truck older than my marriage. He lives in a house with no central air conditioning." This is a man who has stopped caring for himself, Your Honor, and we cannot stand by and watch it happen. He used my truck against me. The same truck I drove to build a network of care facilities that employ 3,000 people across 6 counties. He used my clothes against me. The clothes Colleen picked out because she said a man who dresses simply thinks clearly. He used my silence against me, not knowing that every second of it had been deliberate. Brent continued for another 10 minutes. He described my confusion at the dinner table, my refusal to engage with the care plan, my supposed inability to manage basic decisions. Every sentence was rehearsed. Every detail was selected to paint the portrait of a man dissolving into old age while his family scrambled to protect him. Lorraine stared at her lap. She did not nod. She did not shake her head. She sat perfectly still. And I could not tell if she believed what she was hearing or if she had simply run out of ways to stop it. When Brent finished, the judge turned to Vernon. "Mr. Ashford, does the respondent wish to present any evidence at this time?" The courtroom was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens right before something irreversible. I could hear the ventilation system humming above the dropped ceiling. I could hear Brent's attorney clicking a pen cap behind his table. I could hear my own breathing, steady and slow, the way it had been steady for 14 days while I waited for this exact moment. Vernon stood up. He did not rush. He adjusted his glasses, buttoned his jacket, and faced the bench with the composure of a man who had spent 31 years in elder law and had never once raised his voice in a courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, "before we proceed, I have supplemental documentation. An independent forensic psychiatric evaluation, a corporate audit, and additional evidence bearing directly on the credibility of the petitioner's medical records." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. This one had weight. Brent leaned toward his attorney. I could not hear the words, but I read his lips clearly enough. What documentation? He had nothing 2 weeks ago. His attorney did not answer. He was watching Vernon the way a man watches a door that just opened in a wall he thought was solid. Judge Whitfield removed his reading glasses, set them on the bench, and looked at Vernon for a long moment. "You may proceed." "Mr. Ashford." Vernon opened his briefcase. The clasps snapped in the quiet courtroom like 2 small bones breaking. He reached inside and laid 5 folders on the table in a single row, each one landing with a soft thud that carried farther than it should have. I watched Brent's face as each folder touched the wood. The confidence did not leave all at once. It left in stages, like lights going off in a building, floor by floor, until the whole structure stood dark. The first folder was labeled in Vernon's careful handwriting. I could read it from where I sat. Dr. Raymond Holt, license suspension, 2019. Vernon opened the first folder, and the documents did the screaming for him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Every word landed like a surgical instrument placed on a sterile tray, precise, deliberate, final. Dr. Raymond Holt's medical license was suspended by the California Medical Board in 2019, Vernon said. He held up the suspension letter so the judge could see the seal. He has not practiced medicine in 6 years. The signature on the petitioner's evaluation is a forgery. Brent's attorney stood. "Objection, Your Honor. This document has not been—" "Overruled," Judge Whitfield said. He did not look at the attorney. He was reading the suspension letter Vernon had placed before him. "Continue." "Mr. Ashford." Vernon opened the second folder. "The petitioner filed this guardianship action on August 29th, he said. 23 days before the family dinner where the respondent was supposedly first confronted about his health. The timeline is fabricated. The dinner was not an intervention. It was theater, staged after the legal machinery was already in motion." Brent's attorney rose again. "Your Honor, overruled." The gavel came down once, a flat crack that echoed off the marble. "Let the record reflect the court's serious concern regarding the authenticity of the petitioner's medical documentation. Continue." I watched each folder land. And I understood something about justice. It is not loud. It is just very, very precise. Vernon opened the third folder, the sealed forensic evaluation. He read Dr. Calloway's conclusion aloud. No evidence of cognitive decline. Scores in the top percentile across every domain. A written statement that in 3 decades of practice, she had rarely evaluated a patient this sharp at any age. He set the report beside the forged one. The contrast was not subtle. It was the difference between a photograph and a child's drawing. The fourth folder held the audit. Vernon walked the judge through the shell company. The denied vendor license, the virtual mailbox, and the pattern identical across 24 cases in 4 years. He named the victims. He named the scheme. He connected every thread to a single man whose name Brent's own attorney had never heard spoken in open court. Brent was gripping the edge of his table. His knuckles had gone white. His attorney had stopped writing and was staring at the stack of evidence the way a man stares at water rising in a room with no door. Brent's face did not fall all at once. It collapsed in stages, like a building losing its floors one by one. First, the arrogance, then the composure, then the certainty, until what remained was something I had never seen on my son-in-law's face before. Fear. Vernon closed the fourth folder and stepped back from the bench. He looked at me. I understood. I stood up. It was the first time I had risen from the respondent's chair in 2 hearings. The courtroom went silent. Not the ordinary silence of procedure, but the deep silence that fills a room when everyone in it realizes the story they have been told is not the story that is happening. I placed my hands flat on the table and angled the microphone toward myself. I looked at the judge. Then I looked at Brent. I built this company, I said. Then, after a pause long enough for it to land, I wrote the safety standards that denied Kirk Bentley a vendor license 8 years ago. And I have spent the last 2 weeks proving that the man my daughter married used a fraud ring to try to take what my wife and I spent our lives building. The courtroom held its breath. I could hear the ventilation system cycling above the ceiling tiles. I could hear the court reporter's fingers frozen above her keys. I could taste the bitter courthouse coffee still coating my tongue from 6 hours ago. Brent leaned toward his attorney. His voice cracked, and it carried. He that is not he lives in a bungalow. His attorney did not respond. There was nothing to respond with. The man in the plain khaki shirt, who drove a 20-year-old truck and lived in a house without central air, had just identified himself as the sole controlling beneficiary of the largest independent elder care network in the region. Everything Brent had used as evidence of incompetence was evidence of something else entirely. A man who never needed to prove anything to anyone, until someone forced his hand. The courtroom was silent. Brent was gripping the table with both hands. His attorney had closed his legal pad. And in the gallery, 3 rows back, Lorraine was staring at me like she had never seen me before. She hadn't. My daughter was still staring at me when Brent's attorney stood and asked for a recess. Judge Whitfield did not pause. He did not consult his calendar. He said one word. Denied. The word landed on the courtroom like a lock snapping shut. Brent's attorney sat back down. Brent did not. He stood without permission. His chair scraped against the marble, and the sound cut through the silence like a knife on glass. His attorney grabbed his sleeve, and Brent pulled free. "This was not my plan," he said. His voice was louder than it needed to be. The voice of a man who had rehearsed confidence for so long that he did not know how to sound afraid. Kirk Bentley came to us. He said it was standard procedure. He said the evaluation was legitimate. I trusted him. Vernon did not move. He did not object. He did not even look at Brent. He sat with his hands folded on the table and let my son-in-law talk, the way a fisherman lets a hooked fish run until it has no strength left. Brent kept going.
Kirk brought the doctor. Kirk handled the paperwork. Kirk said none of this would ever go to court because people like him just sign the papers.
People like him. He meant people like me. Old men in plain shirts who live in bungalows and drive trucks with dented tailgates. People who have already outlived the person who would have fought for them. People who are supposed to be too tired, too confused, too alone to push back. Watching a man destroy himself on the witness stand is like watching a fire eat a house from the inside. By the time you see the flames, the structure is already gone. Brent, sit down, his attorney said. Do not say another word. But Brent could not stop. The fear had cracked something open, and everything behind it was pouring out. Names, dates, conversations, promises Kirk Bentley had made over dinners and phone calls and encrypted messages. Every sentence was an admission his attorney could not retract. Every word went into the court record like a nail being driven into his own coffin. He told me the old man would never fight it, Brent said, and his voice broke on the last word. He said people like him just sign the papers. He said it twice. And the second time, I understood exactly how small my daughter's husband had always believed I was. Not just now, not just during the petition. Always. From the first dinner, the first handshake, the first time he looked at me across a table and saw nothing but a man whose life was almost over. Vernon stood. He did not rush. He buttoned his jacket and faced the bench. Your Honor, the vendor, Mr. Caldwell just named Kirk Bentley was denied a vendor license by the respondent's own company in 2017 for failing safety and credentialing standards. Mr. Caldwell partnered with the one man who had a personal vendetta against the very network he was trying to steal. The judge set his pen down. He removed his glasses and looked at Brent the way a man looks at something he has finished reading. The petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice, Judge Whitfield said. The gavel came down once. This court is referring the matter in its entirety to the San Diego County District Attorney for investigation of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. All parties named in the respondent's supplemental filings are to be included in the referral. The gavel struck again. The sound was final. Not loud, but absolute. The way a door sounds when it closes and you know it is never going to open again. Brent's fingers slid off the edge of the table. His attorney was already packing his briefcase, head down, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who knows this case is no longer civil. The bailiff stepped forward, not touching Brent, but standing close enough that the message was clear. I did not know who he was, Brent said. He was looking at me when he said it. And for the first time, his voice held something that was not anger or arrogance or calculation. It was the sound of a man realizing that the person he dismissed as harmless had been the most dangerous one in the room all along. I did not answer him. There was nothing left to say. In the gallery, Lorraine was already standing. I saw her rise from the bench, saw her hands drop to her sides, saw her take the first step into the aisle. But she was not looking at her husband. She was walking toward me. Lorraine crossed the aisle one slow step at a time, shoulders carrying 40 years of a lie she had only just recognized. She did not look back at Brent. She did not look at his attorney. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was small and had broken something she did not know how to fix. She stopped 2 feet from my chair. The courtroom was emptying behind her, the bailiff guiding Brent toward a side door, the court reporter packing her machine, the gallery draining into the hallway. But my daughter stood still. Vernon touched my arm. We moved into the hallway. Lorraine followed. The marble corridor was empty. Afternoon light falling through tall windows and pooling on the floor in long rectangles. Somewhere behind the courtroom door, I could hear Brent's voice, muffled and rising.
still arguing with his attorney the way a drowning man argues with the current. Lorraine reached into her handbag. She pulled out her phone. The screen was already open to a recording. The same recording Hadley had made 2 nights ago, in the hallway of the La Jolla condo. "Hadley recorded this 2 nights ago," she said. Her hand was trembling so badly the phone nearly slipped. She placed it in Vernon's palm without looking at him. "It is everything." Vernon glanced at me. I nodded. He pressed play, and Brent's voice filled the hallway, thin through the phone speaker, but perfectly clear. Every word, every name, every admission that had poured out of my son-in-law's mouth while his 15-year-old daughter held a phone against a doorframe and learned exactly who her father was. Forgiving your child is not hard. It is instant. It is involuntary. It is the most terrifying reflex a parent has, because it happens before you can decide whether it should. Vernon stopped the playback. "This corroborates every piece of evidence we presented," he said. "I will take it to the judge now." He walked back toward the courtroom. The door closed behind him, and then it was just Lorraine and me, standing in a marble hallway, with nothing between us except 11 years of distance and the echo of everything that had just happened. "Did Hadley ask you to bring this?" I said. Lorraine shook her head. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She was holding it the way her mother used to hold it, jaw tight, chin level, everything locked behind a wall that was cracking from the inside. "She asked me to do the right thing," Lorraine said. "I am 2 weeks late." I did not say anything for a long time. The hallway was quiet. The light moved across the floor as a cloud passed outside. I could smell Lorraine's perfume. Something floral and expensive. Nothing like the drugstore lavender her mother wore, mixed with the salt of tears she was swallowing rather than letting fall. There are silences between a father and daughter that say more than any courtroom transcript ever could. This was one of them. The silence held everything: the dinner table, where she looked at her lap instead of looking at me. The driveway, where she let Brent take my arm. The weeks of phone calls she did not return. It held all of it. And it held the fact that she was standing here now, on this side of the hallway, having just handed the last piece of evidence to the man defending her father, instead of the man defending her husband. "I should have known," she said. "I should have seen what he was." I put my hand on her shoulder, my calloused palm against the fabric of her blazer. The same gesture I used when she was 8 and came home from school crying because a friend had said something cruel. The same gesture I used when she was 17 and failed her driving test. The same gesture Colleen would have used if she had been standing where I was standing. "You see it now," I said. "That is what matters." She did not hug me. I did not expect her to. But she put her hand over mine on her shoulder and held it there. And that was enough. For now. That was enough. We walked out together. The courthouse doors opened and the afternoon hit us: warm air, street noise, the smell of jasmine from a planter box near the entrance. After hours in that courtroom, the sunlight felt like stepping into a different country. Estelle Garrett was waiting on the steps, silver hair catching the light, thin fingers wrapped around the strap of her handbag, standing the way she had stood that morning at Sunrise Cafe, upright and unbroken. She touched my arm. "Thank you," she said, "for not stopping at just saving yourself." I looked at her. Then I looked at Lorraine. Then I looked at the courthouse behind us, where the case file was being stamped and sealed and forwarded to the district attorney's office. "We are not done yet," I said. "There are 22 other names on that list. Every one of them deserves what you are about to get back." I kept that promise. It took 72 hours for the first arrests and 6 weeks for the first home to be returned.
But it started the morning after I stood on those courthouse steps and told Estelle we were not done. They arrested Brent at 7 in the morning in the driveway of the La Jolla condo, while Hadley watched from her bedroom window. I was not there. I learned about it the way the rest of the county did, from a morning news broadcast. Standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. The footage showed two plainclothes detectives walking him to an unmarked sedan. He was wearing a suit. He had been expecting to go to work. Kirk Bentley did not make it that easy. Vernon called me an hour later. They picked him up at a motel 6 miles from the border, he said. Packed bag, cash, burner phone. The DA has expanded the case. 43 victims so far, and they are still counting. 43. The number had nearly doubled since the hearing. The same forged documents, the same shell company, the same playbook applied to men and women across the county who had committed no crime except growing old without someone to protect them. 43 victims. And every single one of them had been told the same lie, that they were too old to know what was happening to them. I spread the legal fund paperwork across my kitchen table that afternoon. Vernon had drafted the trust amendment overnight. The structure was simple. A dedicated recovery fund, bankrolled through the trust, providing pro bono legal representation to every identified victim. Attorneys would be retained to reverse fraudulent property transfers, challenge illegal guardianships, and restore stolen assets. This could cost millions, Vernon said over the phone. I have millions, I said. They had their homes taken. Start making calls. Vernon started making calls. Over the next 6 weeks, his office became the nerve center of the largest elder fraud recovery effort San Diego County had ever seen. Attorneys were assigned. Court orders were filed. Property transfers were challenged one by one. Each case following the template Vernon built from my own forged evaluation. Complicit family member, shell company, liquidation. The pattern was so consistent that once the first reversal succeeded, the rest fell like dominoes. The first property recovered was Estelle's. I stayed in the car because that moment did not belong to me. It belonged to a 74-year-old retired history teacher who had spent 8 months in a studio apartment, believing she would never stand in her own kitchen again. Vernon drove her to the house, the 3-bedroom she had paid off in 1998. It had the rose garden she had planted when her husband was still alive. It was the same house the fraud ring had sold out from under her with a forged signature and a compliant nephew she had not spoken to in years. The court had reversed the sale that morning. The title was back in her name. A locksmith met them at the front door. I watched from Vernon's car as the man drilled out the old deadbolt and installed a new one. The sound of the drill carried across the quiet street a small mechanical whine that meant something enormous. When he finished, he dropped 2 fresh-cut keys into Estelle's palm. She stood in her own doorway and looked into the living room. The house had been vacant for months. I could see from the car that the curtains were drawn, and dust had settled on the windowsills. It smelled like closed-up rooms and old carpet I knew because I had smelled that smell in dozens of facilities over the years. The smell of a space waiting for someone to come back and make it alive again. Estelle's shoulders began to shake. She pressed the keys against her chest with both hands and wept not quietly, not politely, but the way a person weeps when something they grieved as permanently lost is suddenly returned to them whole. I thought I would die in that studio apartment, she said when Vernon reached her. I thought they had taken everything. The title is back in your name as of this morning, Vernon said. She turned and looked at the car where I sat. She could not have seen my face through the windshield glare, but she looked directly at me anyway. You kept your promise, she said. You actually kept your promise. Estelle walked into her house and closed the door behind her.
I sat in Vernon's car and looked at the list in my shirt pocket. 43 names now. Updated and refolded so many times the creases were wearing through the paper. One name had been crossed off. My phone buzzed. Lorraine. The message was 4 words. Can Hadley stay over? I typed back 2 words. Of course. And set the phone on the counter. Then I made up the guest room for the first time in 11 years. Lorraine stood on my porch holding a duffel bag and wearing the same expression she wore at 12 when she broke the kitchen window and waited 3 hours to tell me. Hadley stood behind her, backpack over one shoulder, quiet and watchful. I held the door open and they walked in. Hadley went straight to the living room couch, sat cross-legged with her backpack in her lap, and stared at the bookshelf like she was seeing something familiar for the first time in years. Lorraine set the duffel on the floor and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the table. The same scarred oak where Colleen used to spread patient charts and work until midnight. Sit down, I said. She sat. I poured coffee that had been reheated too many times and set a cup in front of her. Her fingers wrapped around it, but she did not drink. I knew something was wrong when he brought that dossier home a week before the dinner, she said, staring at the table. I told myself it was concern. It was never concern. She talked for 20 minutes. She told me about arguments she overheard between Brent and Kirk, Bentley arguments she chose not to question. She told me about financial projections Brent left on his desk, spreadsheets with my name at the top, and dollar figures from accounts she had never been told existed. She admitted she suspected the care plan was about money from the beginning and chose comfort over honesty because honesty would have meant admitting her marriage was built on the same kind of lie that guardianship was. Colleen would have known exactly what to say at that kitchen table. I had to settle for saying what she would have wanted me to say, and hoping it was close enough. I am not going to pretend this did not happen, I said. But I am also not going to lose my daughter twice. Here is what I need from you. Honesty. Every time. Even when it is ugly. Her knuckles went white against the ceramic. I do not deserve that door being open, she said. No. But Colleen would have opened it. So I will too. The kitchen was quiet. October air came through a cracked window, carrying the smell of cooling pavement. I could hear the refrigerator humming and Hadley's breathing from the living room, steady and deliberate. The way a person breathes when they are listening to every word in the next room and pretending they are not. Then I heard her feet on the tile. Bare feet. Light and careful. Crossing the kitchen floor the way she used to cross it when she was small and would sneak downstairs for cookies after bedtime. No child should have to choose between her parents and the truth. But some children do. And those are the ones who grow up understanding what integrity actually costs. Hadley did not say anything. She walked straight to me and wrapped her arms around my ribs and pressed her face against my shirt. Her shoulders were shaking. She was trying not to cry and failing. The way her mother had failed. The way Colleen used to fail. 3 generations of women who held everything inside until they found someone safe enough to let it out. I am sorry I had to record Dad, she whispered. I did not want to. I put my arms around her the way I held her when she was 3 and afraid of thunderstorms. She was taller now. Her arms were stronger. But the fear was the same. The fear of a world that had just proven itself less safe than she believed. You did not have to be that brave, I said. But you were. And you saved more people than you will ever know. She pulled back and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Can I sleep in the room with the quilt? She asked. The one Grandma made? I carried her bag to the guest room and spread Colleen's quilt across the bed. The cotton was soft from 1,000 washes. The stitching still tight. The lavender sachet in the closet still holding its scent after all these years. When I turned around,
Lorraine was standing in the doorway watching me. And for the first time in years, she looked like my daughter again. That night, with 2 people asleep under my roof, I sat in the home office and began writing a letter to the board of directors of the Colleen Mercer Elder Protection Foundation. I finished the letter at 2 in the morning. The house was quiet, Hadley asleep under Colleen's quilt. Lorraine curled on the couch with a blanket she had pulled from the hall closet without asking. By the end of the month, the foundation had a charter, a board, and a name in gold letters on a ceremony program I could barely hold because my hands would not stop shaking. The ceremony was small. Folding chairs set up in the lobby of the original facility, the first building Colleen and I had opened. The rented clinic in El Cajon that grew into everything else. No press, no politicians. Just Vernon, Lorraine, Hadley, Estelle, and a handful of staff members who had been with the network long enough to remember my wife's voice. Vernon stood at a lectern someone had borrowed from the conference room. He put on his reading glasses and read the charter aloud. His voice was steady and clear. It had sounded that way in the courtroom. It had sounded that way every day since I called him from my kitchen with a certified letter in my hand. The Colleen Mercer Elder Protection Foundation will provide free legal representation, fraud prevention screening, and emergency transitional housing to victims of elder financial abuse in Southern California. The words filled the lobby. The small audience sat in their folding chairs and listened. I stood beside the lectern with the program in my hands and felt something I had not felt in 11 years. The sensation that Colleen was not just a photograph on my desk, but a presence in the room. Colleen died 11 years ago, and I had spent every one of those years talking to her photograph. But this was the first time I felt her answer. I spoke briefly. I told them about the clinic in 1987, how Colleen said on the first day that we were not building a business, we were building a promise. I told them about the 43 families whose names I carried in my shirt pocket, and how each one of them had reminded me why we built the company in the first place. I did not talk about Brent. I did not talk about the courtroom. That story belonged to the district attorney now. Estelle spoke from her seat. She did not stand. She did not need to. She would have been proud of you, she said. I never met her, but I know that for certain. I nodded. I could not speak after that. Vernon put his hand on my shoulder, and the ceremony moved on. Afterward, Hadley and I mounted the plaque at the building entrance. Bronze, simple, with letters that caught the October sun coming through the propped-open door. She held the level against the wall while I drilled the mounting bolts. Her elbow bumped mine twice, and the second time she laughed, a bright, sudden sound that echoed in the empty lobby like something coming back to life. "Grandpa, is it straight?" she asked. "Close enough," I said. Your grandmother never cared about straight lines. She cared about showing up. A plaque on a wall is just metal and letters, until the person reading it knows what it cost to put it there. Lorraine stood beside me as I stepped back to look at it. The bronze gleamed under the entrance light. The words ran across the center in clean block letters. The Colleen Mercer Elder Protection Foundation. Because everyone deserves someone who will fight for them. Lorraine read it aloud. Quietly. The way you read something you want to memorize. Because everyone deserves someone who will fight for them, she said. That was always you, Dad. I did not correct her. But it was never just me. It was Colleen first. It was Vernon who answered every call. It was Estelle, who walked into a cafe and trusted a stranger. It was Hadley, who held a phone against a door frame and chose the truth over her own father. It was even Lorraine, who handed over the recording 2 weeks late, but handed it over. The lobby emptied. The folding chairs were stacked. The coffee cups were cleared from the table. Hadley and Lorraine walked to the car. I told them I would be a minute.
I stood alone in the lobby and pressed my thumb against Colleen's name on the bronze. The metal was warm from the drill and smooth under my skin. I could smell fresh bronze and the floral scent of a bouquet someone had placed beneath the plaque. "Promise kept," I whispered. Then I walked outside into the October sun and drove my 20-year-old truck back to the bungalow. Because some things do not need to change to matter. I parked the truck in the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. The bungalow looked the same as it always had. No new paint, no new shutters, no sign on the door announcing what the man inside had done. That was fine. Some things do not need to change to matter. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in late October, Hadley and I were sitting on the porch. She was cross-legged in the wicker chair, with a history textbook open across her knees. Estelle had recommended it. A thick paperback about the civil rights movement that Hadley had been reading, one chapter at a time, since the ceremony. I had my coffee in my hands. Strong and black. Made slowly, the way I make it when there is nowhere urgent to be. The jasmine vine Colleen planted was still blooming along the porch railing, late in its season, stubborn as she was. My phone rang. Estelle's name on the screen. "Dorothy got her keys back this morning," she said. Her voice was warm and steady. It had stayed that way, ever since the day she walked into Sunrise Cafe and trusted a stranger. She called me crying. "That is 4 families now, Eugene. 4. Dorothy Marsh was an 81-year-old widow from Claremont who had lost her home to the same forged documents 8 months earlier. She had been living in a 1-bedroom rental with a hot plate and a window that did not lock. This morning, the foundation's legal team handed her the keys to the house she paid off in 1991. 39 to go, I said. If you are still listening to this, you already know. The most dangerous people in the world are not the ones who shout. They are the ones who wait. Estelle hung up. I set the phone on the porch railing and watched the October light move through the jasmine. Birds were singing in the jacarandas down the block. I could hear a neighbor's sprinkler, a dog barking 2 streets over. The small, ordinary sounds of a Saturday morning in a neighborhood where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. Hadley looked up from her book. "Grandpa, how do you keep counting when the number is that big?" "1 at a time," I said. "That is how your grandmother taught me." She nodded and went back to her reading. Her elbow brushed my arm the way it does when she forgets there is someone next to her. The sun was warm on the back of my neck. The coffee tasted like the good kind. The kind you drink when the morning belongs to you and nobody is trying to take it away. I thought about Colleen. I thought about the clinic in El Cajon, where we started with nothing but a rented space and a promise. I thought about Vernon answering his phone every single time I called. I thought about Estelle walking into a cafe and sitting down across from a man she had never met because someone told her he might be able to help. I thought about Lorraine handing over the recording in a marble hallway. 2 weeks late but present. I thought about Hadley holding a phone against a doorframe in the dark while her father confessed to everything. And I thought about the kind of courage it takes to be 15 and choose the truth over the only family you have ever known. I am 72 years old. I wear a $30 shirt and drive a truck older than my granddaughter. And I would not change a single thing about the way this story ended. They called me incompetent. They forged a doctor's name to prove it. They filed papers to take everything Colleen and I built together. They sat me at a dinner table and told me I was confused. They stood in a courtroom and pointed at my clothes and my truck and my quiet house as evidence that I had lost my mind. And in the end, I stood up in that courtroom and said 4 words that ended it all. I built this company. 4 words. That was all it took. Not because the words were powerful, but because the man saying them had spent 50 years making sure they were true. Competence is not a test score or a bank balance.
It is showing up when it would be easier to disappear. It is fighting for people who cannot fight for themselves. It is sitting on a porch with your granddaughter and knowing that the world is a little bit safer than it was last month. I picked up my coffee. I watched the October light come through the jasmine. Hadley turned another page. And now I have one question for you. Have you ever been doubted by the people closest to you? And to you, listening to my story, remember this. I spent 2 weeks in silence while my own son-in-law tried to strip me of everything I built. I let people call me confused. I let them point at my truck and my clothes and my quiet life as proof that I had nothing left to offer. If I could go back, I would tell myself sooner that silence is not the same as surrender. But I would also tell myself that the people who underestimate you are handing you the only advantage you will ever need. Do not make my mistake of waiting until your family is fractured to show them who you really are. Some people will hear this and call it a revenge story. Maybe it is. But I have learned that the best revenge story is not the one where you destroy the person who wronged you. It is the one where you protect the people they would have gone after next. 43 families nearly lost everything to the same scheme that targeted me. The real lesson is not about winning. It is about using what you have to shield the ones who cannot shield themselves. I believe God put me through this trial not to punish me, but to position me where I could fight for people who had no one left to fight for them. That is not a revenge story. That is a purpose. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. What would you have done differently? Would you have spoken up sooner? Or would you have waited like I did? Share this with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated is not the end of their story. And if you have not already, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Please remember that certain details in this story have been dramatized for narrative impact. The message that your worth is never determined by the people who refuse to see it is what I hope stays with you.